Yes.
Dr. Ramesh Sepehrad joins me from Washington. She's a scholar in peace and conflict, and she's the advisory chair of the largest Iranian-American organization. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
There's a new wave of anti-regime protests sparked over the brutal killing of Mahsa Amini. And some of the numbers now say that it's reached 170 cities, more than 400 protesters have been killed, and nearly 20,000 arrested. Those are all estimates. And neither you nor I are in Iran, so it's hard to know exactly what's going on the street. But how would you assess the tempo and the ferocity of the street protests now calling for regime change?
So I think we have to kind of look at these latest waves of protests, which in fact the chants from inside Iran are saying these are not protests, this is a revolution, has some very significant characteristic, whether you look at it from just an average citizen's perspective or a political scientist perspective. And I think that's, it's really an opportunity for us to pause and think about where the people of Iran are going with their message. One of the main characteristics is, obviously, even though that these protests, which is now within its 5th week, started over the brutal killing of Mahsa Amini in custody, the way the society responded to that news is demonstrative of how explosive the Iranian society has been, because there has been killing in the last 43 years. There was the killing of Neda Agha Sultan, there was the killing of several other protesters, and in fact 1,500 protesters in 2019. But this time, the people of Iran are in the streets. The people of Iran are not backing down. The people of Iran are very, very clear with their political message, which is death to Khamenei, death to dictatorship. And these are critical indicators for us to pay attention to determine why it's different this time. I think it's very, very clear that the Iranian people, especially the younger generation, the Gen Zers, are saying that we want this regime gone. We want the end of Khamenei's dictatorship, and what we want is freedom. Another popular chant in Iran is freedom, freedom, freedom. In fact, the chant is, what do we say? And then the crowd always responds, freedom, freedom, freedom. So there is a clear statement of what the problem is, which is Khamenei's dictatorship, and what the solution is, and that is the freedom. So whether we want to really look at it from a statistics perspective of how many people have been arrested or killed, or from the message that's coming from Iran, the overall perspective of where the protests and the uprising and what the Iranian people are calling revolution is leading is to the downfall of the regime and the freedom that the Iranian people desire.
Okay, that's the desire. But
That's
I mean,
right.
it's important to pay attention to the arrests and those detained and those killed, because it shows whether the security services are controlling the street and continue to do so, right? So in a speech on Friday, Ayatollah Khamenei said that the Islamic Revolution had given birth to an unshakable state. That seedling has turned today into a mighty tree, and no one should dare to think that they can uproot it. I mean, he does not seem shaken or stirred, and seems to feel that these demonstrations will just go away.
Well, of course he would, as any other dictator. If you look at throughout the history, any dictator, including people like Hitler, until the very last day, they were still confident and they were still conveyed this message of not being shaken. But when you think about the recent, the Friday evening's attack leading into the Saturday morning in Iran's time against the notorious Evin prison, which was a regime-instigated attack, and it was their plot to massacre political prisoners. The very people that were arrested in recent uprising are also in Evin prison.
I want to let you finish, but I mean, that prison is notable, right? Because that's where It is supposedly one of the most brutal places that you can be sent, and it generally is where the fiercest political opposition is
That's
sent.
right.
Political prisoners are sent to that prison, and often some of them don't come out.
That's right. I mean, this is a prison that has been notorious for more than two regimes, I must say. It was notorious during the Pahlavi's era under the Shah, with the political prisoners being tortured and executed there, as well as obviously the elevation of the number of executions and tortures under the current regime, the theocracy of mullahs. So these attacks on Evin prison is a clear indication of how frightened the regime is, because this is, even though they're trying to kind of portray it as a, or their official narrative is, oh, there was a fire that broke out, there was some conflict or clashes among the prisoners. Well, if that were the truth, then explain the gunshots, then explain the families that are outside the prison that are chanting death to Khamenei, explain the the prisoners inside the prison chanting death to dictatorship, death to Khamenei. So clearly, this is a major indication of how frightened Khamenei is, and his rhetoric on Friday was literally designed to give his demoralized Basiji or IRGC thugs and motivate them to go back out there and kill more people. So I think there are other reports coming from Iran that the incident at Evin prison is also being repeated across the other main prisons in other cities in Iran. Just this morning, I think I had a message that now it is in the city of Karaj. The inmate at Ghazal Hisar prison are protesting with chants to death to Khamenei, and 50 members of the anti-riot unit are at the scene in prison. And again, this is, knowing this regime, I think the regime is preparing for another massacre of political prisoners, just as what they did in 1988. And obviously, they're afraid of what's happening in the streets of Iran during the protests across. In fact, the number of cities has gone up to 190 cities and towns in Iran. And now they want to really massacre the political prisoners, and this is their way of solving their problem. But the fact is that the people of Iran are not backing down. The resistance inside the prison clearly demonstrate that this regime is not even effective inside the prison with the people that they have in custody.
Can you talk to the state? You mentioned the Revolutionary Guards. Can you talk to the staying power of, I mean, this is Khomeini's muscle, right? Khomeini's muscle. Their power, their wealth, their survival depends on the survival of the system. They are brutal. They have killed many Iranians in the past and are prepared to do anything. There is nothing that I understand indicates any of that buckling. I mean, there are no defections as far as we're hearing, and I understand it's hard to hear if there were, but there are no defections. I mean, they are standing like a rock right now in the system. And how do people remove them in order to remove the regime? Because the regime stands behind the Revolutionary Guards.
Well, I think the message and what I'm monitoring coming from inside Iran, Dana, it's speaking to a different posture of IRGC. I have seen reports coming from inside Iran and clips and even audio recording between the dispatch of the IRGC forces as they're trying to crush and crack down on the people. And they're all desperate. They are is a sign of desperation, fatigue, exhaustion, and very demoralized. I think one of the lead IRGC commanders in Tehran was saying that if this neighborhood of Tehran rises up, we will be finished. We will be done. So and I think they realize that obviously Tehran is their stronghold. They realize that they can't be dispatching IRGC and their core I guess, committed IRGC, because, there are layers within IRGC. Those are in there for just a paycheck. Those are in there that are in the more of a administrative and management of it, and those are in there that are very core ideologues that are protectors of Khamenei's dictatorship. So we are seeing crackdown within the IRGC. We are seeing a defection, not from the top layer, which is not that many of them, but also from the lower layers. And I think the other news
What do you base that on? If I can just ask, you're saying you're seeing
Sure.
defections. What's that based on?
So some of the news that's coming from inside Iran is how they're moving their money around, how they're trying to buy properties in countries like Turkey and other countries, so that they're trying to get their families out of Iran, and how they're essentially turning on each other. There's a lot of debate within IRGC that is the path of crackdown the right path for us, because the more we crack down, the more uprising it causes. So I think that in that fraction within the IRGC ranks and the political ranks, Larijani is on record, who used to be the beloved, Larijani brothers, allies of Khamenei, and he's also the person who was eliminated in favor of Ibrahim Raisi to become Iran's current president. So all of those infighting, all of those factionalization, all of those fraction is really coming to surface, and it's really tearing the regime apart from within. So I think if you look at some of those indicators, you really do see that the house of cards that Khamenei has set up, even with the facade and the image of the brutal and the solid power of the IRGC, it's really nothing but a house of cards, and it is not sustaining its facade in the light of ongoing protests and ongoing pressure. And I think one other point that I'd like to make in terms of how do we help the people of Iran, especially with Khamenei's rhetoric and the IRGC's image of having the tight control on Iran, is the international pressure.
Okay, and you've written about that, and I read your latest article where you really feel that the U.S. is not doing what it should, that Washington has been kind of soft pedaling support, and you feel that they should come out, much stronger. And you mentioned end nuclear negotiations with Iran, expand and enforce existing U.S. sanctions, especially in light of the prison massacre, impose travel bans on regime officials and families, freeze their assets in the U.S. I thought that had already been done, quite frankly, but promote global campaign to close Iranian embassies and urge allies to recall their ambassadors, and publicly press for the release of all political prisoners. I mean, in general, though, I mean, a lot of that seems to me that it has been done, has it not? I mean, obviously, ending nuclear negotiations is a much bigger step.
So I think what we are not hearing from the White House is a clear message that we stand with the Iranian people and recognize their right to overthrow this regime and to self-defense. The people of Iran deserve and reserve the right to overthrow this regime. What Washington likes to hide behind is regime change is not our policy. That is not what the Iranian people are asking, to bring boots on the ground to change the regime for us. Iranian people are in the streets chanting death to dictators. Young, old men, women are in the streets, dying, sacrificing to bring this regime down. And they deserve the right to self-defense against the bullets of the IRGC and to overthrow this regime. That is a very clear public and a political statement that Washington can make that could really go a long, long way.
Why does that help? I mean, it seems symbolic to me. It just seems symbolic to me. If you say, make a statement that you support the people in the street. I mean, those statements to a degree have been made by various U.S. officials, including President Biden was sympathetic over the weekend. But I mean, why did those statements really help the people in Iran who are out there fighting the Revolutionary Guard?
So there are two things. One is the statements have been made, but it hasn't been concise. For example, there has been a statement made that we stand with the Iranian women marching in the streets, fighting for their rights. This is not a protest that women are fighting for their rights. This is a protest that is calling for the downfall of this regime. Let's be very clear on our message. Two, I think from the impact of Washington, that could essentially lead to a global campaign to isolate the regime, just like the way the world community isolated the apartheid regime in South Africa. It would really have its more momentous and support in a public sphere where people of Iran essentially will gain the confidence that yes, Iran is not, this regime is essentially rejected by the world community.
I mean,
they're backing us.
we've seen these demonstrations before, though, right? Now, you obviously feel that this is different this time, that the intensity, the length of time that they've been taking place, your measure of how exhausted Iranians are with the regime, how thirsty they are for change, that it's different this time. And that if the West doesn't seize this moment together with Iranians, they will have missed the chance to end this brutal regime in Iran. You really feel that the West has to seize this moment as well as the people in the street in Iran?
Absolutely, absolutely. And let me tell you why. If you look at during the 1980s, when there was massive uprising literally within 2 years of the 79 revolution, that led, it was massive uprising by major opposition groups, among them Mujahideen Khalq, the MEK, and then the establishment of the National Council of Resistance, and the terrors and the executions that also led to the massacre of the 1988. Iranian regime was able to crack down and really suppress the society on two fronts, both on a political front, but also on a social front because of the Iran-Iraq war. During the 1990s, the regime turned into the terrorism in an international space and killing the opponents outside. But yet we still had massive student uprising inside Tehran's universities and other universities. Again, another crackdown. During the 2000, 2002, 2003, all the way to 2009, we had massive uprising, whether it was in the universities or it was in 2009, that was after the elections. That particular uprising started with, where is my vote, to down with Khamenei, down with dictatorship. And now what we look at in 2019, in 2018, 2019, even in 2020 during the pandemic, and now in 2022, the length of these massive nationwide uprising is getting closer and closer, and the frequency is picking up. And the message is no longer over economic grievances or just social grievances, it's also political grievances. So it's all of the above. And the engagement of all of the social sectors, women, youth, labor movement, teachers union, student movement, it's all coming together. And I think this is why this time is different. Just a few days ago, I ran into a video clip by President Obama, who chose not to stand with the people of Iran in 2009, when people were in the streets towards the end saying, down with Khamenei, down with dictator. And he said, in retrospect, that was a mistake. In retrospect, we should have declared our solidarity. We should have been clear with our message. That is why this time is very, very important. And in fact, I think the international community owes it to their own respective national security to stand with the people of Iran that would end this regime. And the desire of the Iranian people is a non-nuclear, secular Republic of Iran that stands on gender equality, freedom of press, fair and free elections, modern judicial system, coexistence with the neighbor, free market economy, all of those things in terms of a future-free Iran. It's also in the interest of the Middle East as a region, interest of the national security of America as a country, and also peace and stability and security for Europe. So the moment is ripe. the situation is ripe, the people are in the street, and that political support for the movement inside Iran and Iran's main opposition group, the National Council of Resistance of Iran, is critical in this moment, so that the Iranian regime understands the world international community is done with them and they're standing with the people of Iran.
Dr. Ramesh Sepehrad, you're full of hope and you're very optimistic. And I think a lot of people find that, perspective really important right now, because I think you're showing in a lot of ways that this is just not another uprising or chapter or more street protests, that we're in a very different chapter this time. So thank you so much for your perspective, and it's great to talk to you.
Thank you so much for having me. Appreciate it.